The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
I recently heard a tremendous story. They just to give me the zchut to write another book. I'm in the middle of one, and I just hope that this story will definitely go into it. And as a matter of fact, I just spoke to the people yesterday again to get all the protein, so I could be able to tell it to you. The only thing is that certain people in the story don't want their name mentioned. I'll certainly honor that. But let me tell you a story which is mamish model alarai. Some of you may know Rabbi Meir Shor, the son of Rav Gedalia Shor, very big Talmud Chacham that lives in Brooklyn. One day people called him and said, you know, across the street from where you live, there's a very special couple. They're not from at all. They're not from at all. But they're very bright and very intelligent. Maybe you should try to invite them to your house for a Shabbat. And a few weeks later, he saw them walking, and he realized that it was them, and he invited them to come in. They were not from B'chlal. And they sat and they were talking at the table, and he saw that they were very deliberate and mentioned, very intellectual people. And he started discussing in Yonim of Torah and mitzvot. And after a while, after getting to know these people for a few weeks, he said to the fellow, whose name was, I don't want to use his exact name, I almost flipped, so we'll call him Mark. So he said to Mark, you're a very intelligent guy. Why don't you try to learn some Torah? Why don't you go, there's a place called Ar Sameach in Spring Valley. Why don't you try Ar Sameach? He said, you know what, it's the summertime, I'll try it for a week. So he went to Ar Sameach, him and his wife, they were there for a week, and they were very discoiled about the people that were there. And to make a long story short, they went back there, and eventually he decided that he's going to learn there, and eventually he learned there, and he became an Elf Yid. One day, 2 or 3 years later, after he was already living in Monsey, he comes back to Rabbi Shor, and he says to Rabbi Shor, I want to tell you something. All my life, I grew up thinking that my relatives were crazy. Because my parents were not from it, and they always told me that all my relatives were out of their mind. And I always believed them. But now I realize they weren't out of their minds, they were just religious. So that means that I really have a whole family someplace. Maybe you could help me find my family. I don't even know who they are. I know that I'm related to some Rebbe in Borough Park. Again, I can't say who it is. I'm related, I think, somehow in a long way. Maybe I'm embarrassed. I don't really know him. We haven't had a shaykhus in a long time. I think if you could call him and just tell him that I would like to see how I'm related to him, maybe you could call him. He said, I do. I'll be happy to call him. So he called this Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, of course, I don't know who exactly you're referring to, but if somebody wants to come, you come. So Mark and his wife, now he's not Mark anymore, he's Moshe David, and he comes with his wife, and they come in, it was Sukkot. And the woman told me yesterday, as she told me 6 months ago when I first heard the story, she said, I took a look at the Rebbe, and I started crying so uncontrollably. He had such a gorgeous Hadach, and it was Bekisha. He had such Kedusha. So I said to her, why were you crying? She said, I don't know what came over me. It was like the feeling the day that I decided to become Krum. All of a sudden I had such a feeling that if I hadn't made this decision, look what I would have lost. I would not have been connected to this person. And I just couldn't stop crying. And meanwhile, her husband was talking to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is telling him, and they're beginning to figure out that he's Taka related. And the Rebbe takes out old stopping from this fellow's uncle, his great uncle in Hungary, that he was a Talmud Chacham and he had Rizik Tvarim. And then the Rebbe is recalling the history of the family, and he says, I remember that I was at Aunt Martha. Don't you have an Aunt Martha? She had a boy, and I was at that brit. He says, no, Aunt Martha has 2 girls. See, she doesn't have any boys. He said, no, but there was a brit that I was at 30 years ago. And the Rebbetzin comes in, she says, Moshe David, it was your brit that the Rebbe was at. And then the Rebbe says, then I remember the whole story. And what happened was that Moshe David's father and mother were not frum. Before they got married, everybody tried to break up the shidduch, and no one from the family came to the Pasada because it was non-frum people. They didn't want to have any shaykhus with them whatsoever. And so therefore the Rebbe said that was the time when I cut off relations with your parents. I didn't want to have anything to do with them. He married a Halal Shabbat, nothing to do with that. But the night before your brit, for some reason your father called me, and he said he wanted I should be Sandak. And I was thinking, to be Sandak, what am I going to go with Shaitas? I'm going to go up to the Bronx where your father lived. He had no Shaitas. The family, what does he need me to be Sandak for? And I was thinking of not going. And then the Rebbetzin came in, and she said, go, not for the boy, not for the father, not for any reason, but just so to be mitzvah. Go be mitzvah when you're holding the baby on your lap, and be mitzvah that someday this kid should be a full boy. And he said, I went and I was mitzvah. And I can't believe it. Here you are, 30 years later, my tefillah was answered. And when I heard the story, I went out of my mind. You know why I went out of my mind? Because I remember, many of you who know me personally know that I'm a moil, that one time I had a brit in Jew Garden, and Rabbi Mulzovitz walked into front of the Rabbi, also one of the Rabbonim in our area. He was a Sandak. And I saw that he was crying like anything when I was doing the brit. And I said to him, I was very close to him, I said to him afterwards, Rabbi Walken, why were you crying? Although that's not related to the family. He says, what do you mean? You don't realize why I'm crying at the brit? I said, no, I don't understand. He says, let me show you something. And he opens up a Gemara. In the back of the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, on that Kuf Lamed Amud Beis, in the back of the Gemara, there's a parish that I never in my life had seen before that, by Rabbi Elio Gutmacher, and it's called Rabbi Elio Greiditzer. And he says like this, he says that many people don't realize that there's a parak in Tehillim that talks about Brit Milah. Many people think that it's really Kapitel Yud Beis, but it's not. It's really Kapitel Vav that says Lamnatseach B'Neginois Al Hashminis. And he shows me that it says in this Meforish that any choila who's mitzvah, any choila that wants to be mitzvah for himself, should be mitzvah, Choneni Hashem Ki Umlam Oni. Hashem, help me because I am unfortunate. And he says, you know what that means? Umlam stands for Arlene Mol. I am a Gemalat Yid, so Hashem, please help me. And then it says something that I absolutely could not believe. It says, Bagam, Yerabein Kol Odam Al Tzaroiso, Ve'eis Befi Hanimor. If anyone goes to a brit, and you have any tzarot, daven and cry to Hashem when that baby is crying from the vein of the brit, coils that oilo, B'li Moinea, because that coil of the child goes straight up without any hesitation. And it answers, and it is worth this tefillah because it's the only cry of a child who has no averus, and now he's crying because he's doing a mitzvah. So if you go to a brit, that's mitzvah. So Rabbi Walken told me, and I have this verse that I go, just when you make the pizza, I cry and I daven for what I need. And I was thinking of a point, so this Rebbe, when did he cry? He cried mamish when that baby with that mark, like David was having the brit, and now 30 years later, the tefillah were answered. And so what do we see? That if you daven, and if you daven at the right time, the Eibush answers the tefillah. It's just a question of sincere davening. But if you daven with the risik of avonet, remember, the brit is one time when you can daven, but there are many other times. You daven and the Eibush answers.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org